There is a painting in Beijing that is 17 feet long and 10 inches tall. You don't look at it, you walk along it. It shows one ordinary morning in one Chinese city 1,000 years ago. 800 people, boats unloading grain, a camel train coming through the gate, tea houses, market stalls, a man being carried to work in a chair. It is the single most detailed picture we have of what the richest city on earth actually looked like. And every transaction in it, every sack of rice, every cup of tea, every one of those 800 people getting paid is running on metal. Copper, coins on a string. Here's the problem with that. At the exact moment this was painted, that country was running out of copper. So they did something nobody on the planet had ever done. They started printing paper and telling people it was money, and it worked for 250 years. Then it didn't. This is the story of the economy that got there first. Paper currency, a reserve requirement written into law, joint stock companies, a central bank in everything but name, and a government that made most of its money taxing trade instead of taxing farmland 600 years before anything comparable existed in the West. Which matters to you more than it sounds like it should, because the money in your wallet right now runs on exactly the principle these people invented. Not backed by metal, issued by a state, worth something only because everyone agrees that it is. And it's the story of what happened next. Because every government that has destroyed its own currency since revolutionary France, Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela, has run the same 5 steps in the same order. This is where that list got written. By people who had no list to read. To understand how they got there, you have to start with the boring thing, not the paper, the weight of the metal. Song China was poorer than the Roman Empire. Not poorer in total, the Song had far more people and far more output than Rome ever did. Poorer per person. And that is the single most useful fact in this entire video, so let's put a number on it. The Madison Project database is the standard reference economic historians use to compare incomes across centuries. It puts income per person in China in the year 1000 at about $1,200 a year in today's money. England that same year, around 1150. Japan about 1,000. Egypt under 1,000. Abbasid Iraq, the richest place in the entire dataset, 1,300. And Roman Italy at the height of the empire 1,000 years earlier was over 1,400. Every one of those numbers would put a country dead last on Earth today. Below Burundi, below Somalia, below anywhere. So what makes the Song remarkable is not that its people were rich. They were not. What makes the Song remarkable is that a society at roughly the same material level as medieval England built financial institutions that England would not build for another 6 centuries. That gap between how poor a place is and how sophisticated its money is turns out to be the most interesting thing in economic history, because it means financial sophistication is not something that gets handed to you by technology. It's something you build when you need it badly enough. And that's the second thing worth killing here, which is the idea that institutions follow prosperity. We tend to assume the causation runs one way. A country gets rich, and then it develops banks and contracts and regulators to manage the wealth. The Song is a very loud counterexample. The banks came first. They came out of scarcity. Not abundance, out of a specific, physical, extremely boring problem that we're about to get into. And that problem has a name once you see it. Call it the wheelbarrow problem. Here is the problem the Song government spent 300 years failing to solve. China's population roughly doubled between the 10th and 11th centuries. The Northern Song census recorded 20 million households, twice what the Han or the Tang had recorded, which historians read as a population somewhere around 90 million people. 90 million, at a time when all of Europe put together was maybe 40. And those 90 million people were not living the way their grandparents had. Cultivated land hit a peak of roughly 48 million hectares, a level neither the Ming nor the Qing would beat centuries later. By 1076, the government had completed something like 10,800 irrigation projects. New rice from Champer ripened fast enough to get 2 harvests a year out of the same field. Farmers stopped growing everything they needed and started growing the one thing their region was good at: tea here, silk there, sugar somewhere else, and buying the rest. That last sentence is the entire economy in miniature. The moment a farmer specializes, he has to trade. And the moment everybody has to trade, everybody needs cash. So the government made cash. In 997, it minted 800 million coins. By 1080, 5.86 billion. By 1085, 6 billion coins in a single year. More copper money every year than the Roman Empire and the Tang dynasty had produced in decades. a more than sevenfold increase inside one lifetime. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Between 1078 and 1085, right at the peak of production, about 50 copper mines shut down because the ore ran out. Copper coins started leaking across the borders into the Liao and Jin empires, where they were worth more. In some frontier regions, the government had to switch to iron coins, and iron is so cheap that buying anything substantial meant physically hauling a wheelbarrow of metal. And iron coins are the detail that makes this real. A string of 1,000 iron coins could weigh something in the order of several kilograms. Buying a horse, or a season's worth of silk, or paying a large tax bill meant physically transporting a load of metal that a single person could not carry. There are accounts of Sichuanese merchants needing a cart to make an ordinary wholesale purchase. When your currency requires a vehicle, your currency has stopped being a technology and started being a tax on doing business. One of the few people who understood what was actually happening was a civil servant named Shen Kuo. Shen Kuo is one of those figures history files in the wrong drawer. He's remembered as a scientist, the man who described the magnetic compass and worked out how fossils got into mountains. But his day job was the treasury. And while everyone around him was asking how to dig up more copper, Shen Kuo was quietly asking a different question. What if the problem isn't how much money exists, but how fast it moves? Hold on to him. He comes back. Because for now, a Chinese economy the size of 90 million people was trying to run on a money supply that was physically limited by how much copper you could dig out of the ground. And it was hitting the wall. The government could not solve this. 16 men in a shop in Chengdu could, and the way they did it was, technically, cheating. The government could not solve this. 16 men in a shop in Chengdu could, and the solution did not come from the emperor. It came from 16 merchants in Chengdu and Sichuan who were sick of the iron coins. The arrangement was simple, and if you've ever used a coat check, you already understand it. You handed your coins to a deposit shop. They gave you a receipt saying how much you'd left with them. The receipt was lighter than the coins, so instead of going back for your money, you just paid people with the receipt. The receipt started circulating. It was called Jiaozi. At first, these were pure IOUs, written for whatever amount you happened to deposit, with no standard denominations at all. Then the 16 biggest merchant houses in Sichuan got together and founded what amounted to a joint note-issuing bank, with standardized printing, multiple anti-counterfeiting seals, and a fixed fee of 30 coins for every 1,000 you converted. Private companies, issuing a private currency, backed by their own reserves, accepted across a province of millions of people. And then, exactly what you'd expect to happen happened. Some of those merchant houses went bankrupt, and people holding their paper found out that the paper was only ever worth as much as the company behind it. So in 1023, the Song government stepped in and nationalized it. They created an office, the Jiaozi Wu, literally the Bureau of the Jiaozi, and in 1024 they issued the first government paper currency in the history of the world. Now here's the part that should make the hair on your arm stand up. The Song did not back their notes one-to-one. They set a legal ceiling on how much paper could be in circulation in Sichuan, a shade over 1.25 million strings worth, and the surviving records are precise down to the last 340, and against all of that paper they held reserves equal to about 1/5, a 20% reserve ratio, set by law, enforced by a government office. In the 11th century, that is fractional reserve banking. That is, functionally, a modern central bank with a monetary base, a note issue, a reserve requirement, and an implicit understanding that not everyone will show up asking for their copper on the same day. The Bank of England would be founded in 1694. Sweden's Stockholm's Banco would print Europe's first banknotes in 1661. The Song had been doing this for 637 years, and here is the part nobody expects. They got away with it. Not for a few years, for 2.5 centuries, which raises the obvious question. Got away with what, exactly? Paper money is the headline, but it's not actually the strangest thing about the Song economy. The strangest thing is where the government got its money. Almost every pre-modern state on Earth ran on land. You tax the harvest, or you tax the landowner because agriculture was where the value was. Rome did it. Every European kingdom did it. The Song started that way too, and then something flipped. By the height of the dynasty, the Song Empire's main source of revenue was no longer the land tax. It was state monopolies and indirect taxes, salt, tea, wine, alum, and duties on trade. The state had figured out that it was more profitable to tax transactions than to tax dirt. That is a fiscal structure that would not become normal anywhere else on Earth for the better part of 1,000 years. Look at what they actually monopolized. Salt, tea, wine, alum, not luxuries, things that ordinary people buy constantly, in small amounts, and cannot easily go without. That is precisely the logic of a modern consumption tax, and it is enormously more efficient to collect than a harvest levy, because instead of sending assessors out to count every farmer's grain, you simply control the point of sale. The state monopoly on Sichuan tea alone was the main source of funding for buying warhorses in Qinghai for the Song cavalry. A cup of tea in a Kaifeng tea house was structurally paying for the army, and it built the machinery to match. In 1087, the government established a maritime customs superintendency at Quanzhou, a bureau whose entire job was assessing duty on cargo arriving from the Islamic world, India, Southeast Asia, and East Africa. Porcelain overtook silk as China's leading export. Jingdezhen, one porcelain town, had over 300 kilns and 12,000 workers. All of this rested on something genuinely new, which was a large urban consumer population. Kaifeng, the northern capital, ran night markets that closed after the third watch and reopened at the fifth, effectively a city that never stopped trading. Contemporary accounts describe shopkeepers who simply did not cook at home because it was cheaper and faster to eat at food stalls. That is a service economy. Hangzhou, the southern capital, went from around 200,000 people at the start of the 12th century to 500,000 by 1170, to over 1 million a century later, almost certainly the largest city on earth at the time. Merchants organized into guilds that negotiated prices with wholesalers and represented their trade to the government. And to finance long voyages, they built something called daonyu, a pool of shareholders who put up the capital, and a separate class of professional operators, jingsheng, who ran the venture and took a share of the profit. Owners separated from managers, returns proportional to your stake, risk spread across multiple ships so that one wreck didn't ruin you. That is a joint stock company. The mathematician Qin Jieshao said a textbook exercise around one such partnership. 4 parties, 424,000 strings of cash, pooled into a single Southeast Asian trading venture. And in 1077, the finance minister Shen Kuo wrote this down. A village of 10 households may have 100,000 coins. If one man hoards them, in 100 years it is still 100,000. If they circulate among all 10, the utility becomes 1 million. That is the velocity of money. Shen Kuo described it in 1077. Irving Fisher would formalize it as an equation in 1911. So, a country with paper currency, reserve requirements, corporations, a consumption tax base, and a working theory of monetary circulation, 800 years early, which raises a question that breaks most people's mental model of history. If they had all of that, why wasn't anybody actually getting richer? Because they weren't, and the answer is brutal. Here is the Madison series for China across the Song. Year 1000, $1,225 per person. Year 1090, right at the peak after the paper money, after the 6 billion coins, after the irrigation and the double harvests, 1222. Year 1150, 1181. 3 centuries of the most sophisticated financial engineering on the planet, and it went down. Total output grew enormously. The Song economy was, by most estimates, several times the size of anything in Europe. But population grew just as fast, and in an economy where the ceiling is still how much food you can grow, output per person doesn't move. Every extra bushel of rice that all those irrigation projects produced went into feeding an extra mouth, not into making an existing person richer. This is the trap that every single society on earth was stuck in before the 19th century, and it is the single most important fact in economic history. You can invent paper money, you can invent the corporation, you can invent central banking. None of it lifts the ceiling because the ceiling isn't financial. It's physical. It's soil and calories and how much work a human body and an ox can do in a day. To be fair to the Song, they came closer than anyone. Robert Hartwell estimated that iron output per person rose 6-fold between 806 and 1078, reaching something like 125,000 tons a year. Though it's worth saying out loud that other historians, Donald Wagner in particular, think Hartwell's method overstates it. And Cheng Minsheng's work suggests an ordinary Song laborer earned about 100 coins a day against a subsistence level of 20. 5 times subsistence for a common worker in the 12th century. That is genuinely extraordinary. It just wasn't an industrial revolution. And the thing that finally broke the Song wasn't the ceiling anyway. It was the money. In 1127, the Song lost the entire north of China to the Jin. The court fled south, rebuilt the capital at Hangzhou, and for the next 150 years the Southern Song existed as a permanently besieged, permanently underfunded state fighting a war it could not afford. And it had a printing press. The pattern from here is one you have seen before because every currency collapse in history has run it. Remember the list. This is where it gets written. Step 1. Issue the notes conservatively. The Huazi launched in 1160, backed by 280,000 strings of copper cash held in reserve. Step 2. Discover that the notes are useful, and that printing them is much easier than collecting taxes. Between 1161 and 1166, the government issued 28 million strings worth. Hold those two numbers next to each other for a second. 280,000 strings in the vault, 28 million strings in circulation. That reserve ratio the Northern Song wrote into law, the 1/5, the 20%, it is now 1%. By the early 12th century, note issues across the empire were running at 26 million strings a year. Each new series was supposed to be issued every 3 years and the old ones destroyed, but the old ones weren't destroyed. They kept circulating at a discount, so the real quantity of paper in existence was always higher than the official number. In 1195, the standard issue was raised from 20 to 30 million strings. Step 3. The market notices. In situ, the government was circulating something like 3.8 million strings worth of paper against roughly 700,000 iron coins in reserve, and then raised the paper to 4.1. By 1204, the note with a face value of 1,000 coins was changing hands for 400 coins. Then for 100, 90% of the value gone, and there's a mechanism hiding inside Step 3 that deserves its own sentence, because it is the part every government gets wrong. The notes were legally supposed to expire after 3 years, be handed in, and be destroyed with a fresh series replacing them. That is a perfectly sound design. It's a hard cap on the money supply, enforced automatically. But expired notes were not actually destroyed. They kept circulating at a discount because a note worth something is better than a note worth nothing, and nobody with a stack of them was going to volunteer to eat the loss. So each new issue was added on top of an old issue that was supposed to be gone. The official number said one thing, the quantity of paper actually in people's hands said something much larger. Counterfeiting, which the multiple seals were never quite able to stop, piled on top of that. Step 4. People stop holding the paper and start holding the metal. Copper coins vanished from circulation into private hoards, which meant even less real money in the economy, which meant even more pressure to print. A note for 200 coins, one contemporary complained, would not buy a single straw sandal. This is Gresham's law running in real time, 300 years before Thomas Gresham was born. Bad money drives out good. When two currencies circulate and one is visibly losing value, everybody spends the bad one and keeps the good one. Which means the good money, the copper that actually held its value, disappeared into jars and floorboards and holes in the ground. And because the copper disappeared, the economy had even less real money in it, which made the government print even more paper, which made the copper disappear faster. It is a spiral, and the spiral feeds itself. Chengdu had died in 1095, 32 years before the North fell. He never saw any of this. He had spent his life arguing that money is only worth what it does when it moves, and he never had to watch what happens when it moves so fast that nobody wants to be holding it. Step 5. The war gets worse. As the Mongols pushed south, the army had to be paid, and the only instrument left was the press. The government printed. The notes died. In 1279, the Southern Song died with them. Nobody had ever done this before. There was no historical precedent to warn them, no theory of inflation, no cautionary tale from a previous century. They were the cautionary tale. They were writing it in real time, and every government since, the Yuan, Revolutionary France, Weimar Germany, Zimbabwe, Venezuela has run some version of the exact same 5 steps. So the easy lesson here is that printing money is bad. It is very easy to look at this and draw the smug conclusion. Paper money is a scam. They printed too much, it collapsed, told you so. That's not the lesson, and it isn't what the data says. The Song ran paper currency successfully for the better part of 250 years. It worked. It let an economy of 90 million people trade at a scale that the copper supply physically could not have supported. The alternative wasn't a stable metal currency. The alternative was an economy strangled by the fact that there wasn't enough metal in the ground. The lesson is narrower and much more uncomfortable than printing money is bad. It's this. Paper money is a promise, and the thing that destroys the promise is never the paper. It's the war. The Northern Song, with a reserve ratio, a legal issuance cap, and a functioning tax base, ran the system for a century without catastrophe. The Southern Song, fighting for its life against the Jin and then the Mongols with half its territory and all of its expenses, ran the same system into the ground in decades. Same instrument, same institutions, different fiscal pressure. The instrument didn't fail. The state failed and the instrument recorded it. which is worth sitting with because every currency you have ever used is a Song currency, not backed by metal, issued by a state, accepted because everyone else accepts it, because the government will take it back as tax. Every argument being had right now about central banks, about quantitative easing, about deficits and war spending, and what happens when a government's obligations outrun its revenue, all of it was already had in Chinese in the 13th century by people who did not have a single historical example to learn from. We do. We have theirs. Ancient Rome gets remembered for its armies. Song China gets remembered, when it gets remembered at all, for poetry and porcelain. But if you want to understand the machinery you actually live inside, the notes in your wallet, the number on your banking app, the promise that all of it is worth something tomorrow, the place that invented it wasn't Amsterdam and it wasn't London. It was a print shop in Sichuan, 1,000 years ago, solving a problem about the weight of iron coins. If this kind of story is worth your time, hit like and drop a comment below. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And if you want more deep dives like this every week, subscribe now. It's free, and it's the best way to support the channel.